So today I wanted to speak with Ali Noorani, who is the president and CEO of the nonpartisan advocacy group, the National Immigration Forum, and also hosts his own podcast, the Only in America podcast. Ali, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So we know that President. I do want to get to the big burning issue of kids in cages, which riled up so much opposition to President Trump during his administration. But I want to start with the executive order that we saw from President Biden that hit on three distinct areas in terms of immigration policy. And I'm wondering if you can sort of walk us through those, how much each of those mean, and what the impact is going forward as he implements those orders.
Sure. Well, the first one of the orders was really focused on asylum seekers at the border. And what he did here is that he asked his administration to begin a process to look at the migrant protection protocols, or remain in Mexico. In essence, the policy that was put in place after the child separation policy that forced migrant families to wait in Mexico while their cases were being heard. As part of that executive order, he also looked south to Central America and has begun a process to really restore dignity, lessen corruption, lessen impunity, really attack the issues of violence in Central America. In essence, the root causes of migration. So the first order really kind of took a balance of looking at the border, but looking at the root causes of migration, particularly from Central America.
I want to second up for a quick second on the issue of asylum. Was it the previous case, and this is just my own ignorance here, was it previously the case that if you showed up and you made a claim seeking asylum, that you got to come in and be here while that claim was pending? How was it handled prior to Trump?
So prior to Trump, and according to law, what happens is that, let's say I live in Honduras, right? And my family was killed by a gang or a cartel, or I was persecuted in some way. I have the legal right to be able to come to the US and to present myself to a Customs and Border Patrol officer and ask for asylum protection. I would then have to pass a credible fear interview. Typically, those credible fear interviews are conducted by asylum officers, not CBP agents, as they were done under the Trump administration. If I passed that credible fear interview, then my case would in essence move into the court system. I would then be allowed to enter the US and in essence wait. Under the Obama administration, there were efforts to detain families while their cases were being held or being processed, but that was, sometimes I did it, sometimes I didn't. And oftentimes what would happen is that they would be held and they'd be released with an alternative to detention, like an ankle bracelet. All of those options are exponentially more humane than what the Trump administration moved forward with, obviously.
And so the question now then is, of the kids who were separated from their families and were being held by the Trump administration in these conditions, which ranged from deplorable to maybe possibly legal, what has the Biden administration done since January 20th to mitigate those conditions, to not just the long-term, unfortunately, long-term efforts to reunite them with their families, but also just the day-to-day, the everyday conditions in which they're living? Some of these kids, some of these younger kids were apparently experiencing states close to PTSD or catatonia, just going into shock from the way they were treated. What is the Biden administration doing today, right now, to ensure that changes, if not overnight, then 2 days from now?
So what's happening now at the border is that you still have unaccompanied children presenting at the border asking for protection. What the Biden administration has done in the last couple of weeks is to stand up increased shelter space so that these children have a safe place to remain until a guardian or a foster home can be identified within the United States. They have, in essence, kind of reopened some spaces that are much larger because of COVID-19. So they're doing everything that they can right now to put resources in place. The big challenge for the Biden administration is that this is a humanitarian crisis nested within a global pandemic, nested within just the sheer destruction of the previous policy by the Trump administration. So they've got to work extra hard to move immigration judges to the border, asylum officers to the border, make sure that there's infrastructure, but then also that they are collaborating with community-based organizations all the way from Brownsville to Tijuana, so that there's a support network for children and families once they're released.
And so it sounds like, I'm kind of extrapolating from what you said, it sounds like they're standing up networks of advocates and other people, if not stakeholders, who maybe have been shut out of this process for the past 4 years. Is that relatively accurate?
You're absolutely right, Jonathan. And the Trump administration, oftentimes what they would do is say work with an organization in El Paso like the Annunciation House, which is the largest shelter in El Paso. They would call up the Annunciation House right when they'd be dropping families off at the bus station in El Paso. What the Biden administration needs to do is set up relationships and communications much further or much earlier in that process, which is going to make it easier on the organizations, on the families, and really across the board. The other thing to keep an eye on that we're particularly interested in is, will the UNHCR and International Organization of Migration,
that's UN Commission on Human Rights, correct?
Correct. UN High Commission on Refugees. UN High Commission on Refugees. Thank you.
Thank you.
They've been deployed to Mexico's southern border to help kind of manage the flow, but they've never been at Mexico's northern border, in essence, the U.S.-Mexico border. So we think that deploying UNHCR to the U.S.-Mexico border could also help the situation.
And it sounds like you're saying the situation still needs help. So granted that we're not yet a month into the Biden administration, are you, as an advocate for immigrants, are you satisfied with the progress that's been made by the Biden administration? Understanding that you want them to do more, do you think, yes, this is exactly, if not better, than where I hoped they would be by now?
Well, I mean, none of the problems that the Trump administration left for the Biden folks were going to be resolved in 1 day or 1 month. This is going to be a 4-year effort to turn everything around. The reason why we're confident that things are headed in the right direction is, number one, they've got the right staff in place, from Secretary Mayorkas all the way through DHS and even Health and Human Services. You got smart people doing good work. They're thinking about what are the processes to reopen these channels for asylum. If you go from 0 to 60 overnight, it creates just a different kind of chaos. So to take a beat and really kind of think about, again, kind of the infrastructure and the processes that need to be in place, I think in the long term is really good for the safety of these families, but also the safety of the country.
So I don't want to put you on the hot seat here, except for the fact that I totally want to put you on the hot seat here. And what I want to ask you is, there's this effort now, right? The Congress is talking to inspectors general, and they're looking at the conduct, the behind the scenes policy conduct of everyone from Jeff Sessions on down in the creation of these policies that led to the separation of families. Do you think people should go to jail for what the Trump administration did and how they did it behind the scenes, and why?
I mean, some of the Inspector General reports out of the Department of Justice of what Rod Rosenstein did and what Sessions did are just, I don't even have the adjectives for a family-friendly show to give you a sense of how I feel about them, right? Yeah. But what's important here is that the Department of Justice digs deep into who did what, were they acting under legal authority, and if there's a criminal case to be pursued, they should pursue it. But just as importantly, the Biden administration needs to make sure that there are the safeguards in place from a policy perspective, so that we as the United States never, ever, ever again see the separation of families as a legitimate policy choice.
I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that immigration was such a driving force, as I mentioned earlier, such a driving force behind galvanizing support for Trump, right? It sort of detonated, demolished the old uneasy coalition within the Republican Party, where there were business interests that were happy to have a flow of legal, documented workers coming in, as well as undocumented workers who they could exploit. And we only have a couple minutes, but I'm curious whether you think that what's happened to that coalition, that business sector of the pro-immigration business sector of the Republican Party, and if
So I think that the Biden folks have an incredible opportunity in the next 4 years. It's not just about explaining these changes in immigration policy to the progressive or the liberal activist base. There are a massive number of suburban voters, particularly women voters who used to see themselves as Republican, who were turned off in 2018 by child separation and turned off in 2020 by the ongoing Trump administration's immigration policies. That slice of the American public is looking for a different way to go on immigration. And that therein lies the opportunity for President Biden and his team.
And real quickly, do you think that do you see signs that the Biden administration is doing what it needs to prevent exploitation of undocumented workers by businesses in America, right? It's very easy to crack down on the workers. Do you see that business enforcement being put in place as well?
That's a great question. I think that having hopefully, Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, in as a Secretary of Labor. I worked with him when he was in Massachusetts and he was a state rep. He gets these issues. I think he is the perfect Secretary of Labor to be really holding unscrupulous employers accountable for the way they're treating undocumented immigrant workers, as well as native born workers.
Well, we're gonna have to keep an eye on this. That's the job of being good citizens, regardless of who's in office. So we'll be keeping an eye on this and hopefully talking to you again. Ali Noorani, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.